Hi design thinkers, today we are going to be building out a UI switch inside of Figma. We are going to be learning a lot more though than just building a basic switch. We're going to be covering things to do with auto layouts and interesting ways that we can use it. We're also going to be understanding a bit about color tokens and how we can use them. And last of all, we're going to be understanding how to set up our components and layer our components so that we can reuse them throughout our design system and customize them in very different ways. And if all those things interest you, then please sit back, relax, and let's jump into the video. All right, so here we are inside of Figma, and we are going to start right here. Now I'm going to switch over to my layer. I'm going to actually start asking a couple of questions, because this series is going to be all about building the ultimate UI assets. We got to ask ourselves a couple of key questions. Ideally, if you're building a design system, you're going to be reusing those design system assets. You want to reuse those assets in multiple places. You want to reuse a lot of these design assets over multiple designs. So if we are doing all of these things, then building these components out is critical. We can integrate them into our actual design system, and we can reuse them again and again. That being said, if you're building these assets for you, that's fantastic, because like yourself, you'll be able to then reuse your own assets again and again. And if you can build these assets to be open-ended and customizable, then you will never need to build this asset ever again, and you only need to build it once. And that is the most important thing. If you're designing, much better off build something once and then reuse it as much as you can. So let's save some time, make some more money, and let's build some really cool assets. So how does this all start? I'm going to cover a couple of concepts about this switch. Now, a basic switch, of course, is why I chose a simple UI asset. It has three major parts to it. You can only see two, which is your background, the puck, which is your toggle, and then there's actually a space that's a gap in between. Now, you don't necessarily do anything with that space, but with that space, we can understand what could go in or not go in there. So let's break this down a little more. Now that we broke down the concept of here's the three parts, we also can start to look at what's called color tokens. We actually use color tokens, or can set color tokens inside of our actual design system. That's exactly what it is when we actually have our own color palette. So if I was, for example, to draw out three different colors, and then I was to save one of these to my actual library of colors, then those would be my actual color tokens. Color tokens are also really handy when we want to come down to building out the actual component library and then having code that's referencing those tokens. And furthermore, the one last thing to do with this really easy concept of using color tokens on this asset is if you layer your color tokens correctly, how easy would it be to simply switch it out for another asset and then simply just switch your colors over to a different actual color set. And now I have quickly turned this asset into a different asset by just changing the color tokens applied to each of the specified color segments on this switch. And that's the power we can do with instantly changing over color tokens. I'm not going to be covering the other types of tokens, but we can also consider border tokens, the rounding tokens, which is rounding for the edges, and then we can also take on other tokens that are to do with either the component itself as a whole or as well text tokens for the text that we could add into it and reference icon imagery tokens. But we're not doing that right now. We are just going to make a somewhat basic switch, probably a little bit more advanced than necessary. The switch itself has also padding. So what we need to understand is there's going to be an empty cell here, and there's going to be your toggle. And there is padding around the toggle that keeps it inside of the main container. As I said, if this is going to be the ultimate designed asset, you need to take into account of a lot more elements that could potentially be inside of this switch, rather than just simply making one square and then rounding it, and then a big square and then rounding it. Because we could add in our icons, we could also have it where it has text, and we can have it flip back and forth. Overall, this is roughly our layering, and we can layer layers either on top or underneath this whole section inside of our switch. And this is where the real power happens. If we think of how we layer our content and we name it with a consistent naming convention, we can then switch these layers on and off, just like layers inside of Photoshop. And then from here, we can take our layered button system. We will have our master switch, and then our master switch can then be modified. You can create different types of children, and then you can start to change the way the switch works. The great part about doing it this way is that if I modify something on the master, it will then actually propagate down the chain to the children. For example, I believe we'll see how this works. If I was just to hide that, there we go. It's hidden the toggle for all of them. If I was to turn this toggle, make it just an outline, it will then turn that one into an outline. The difference is that these ones had a fill, and that fill was assigned to it, so it overridden the actual parent. This is the parent, and this is the child for that, and these are the children for that as well. And that's how we can create layered components. Don't worry, we're going to make it soon. And then in the end, we have our ultimate switch. And this ultimate switch we can reuse again and again and again, and create, as you can see, many different variations. And it has all of the components all set up for you. And you can switch around the colors, and you can change the shadowing, you can change your text, so on and so forth. And that is what an ultimate UI switch would be. Let's and for example, here's some examples. Let's build it. Let's give it a shot. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself a frame. You can set it up however you like, but I'm going to set it up in a particular way. I'm going to set my width to, I usually go 64 multiplied by 2, and then I'm going to do 64 high. I use a ratio of 4. I've got this frame. What I'm going to call this outer frame will be the switch. And what else I'm going to do is grab 2 more frames. Okay, I'm going to grab those 2 frames. Like, now, I guess both of these two, they have the little link on it. So I'm happy to say that the height will be 64. I'm going to undo that one. And you can press multiply with this little star, plus 2, bam, there's your kind of your width if you're wanting to understand how I did that. And from here, I have these 2 layers. I'm going to call one a spacer. You can really call it whatever you like. It's going to basically be my empty block. And you'll see, you understand what that does in a second. The other one is also going to be empty, but it's going to be my actual toggle. section. Now, why make a toggle section? What is a toggle section? A toggle section is a box. The box stays the same size, but what goes in it doesn't. That changes. And that is the power of using auto layout. If I was to turn that into an auto layout, first of all, I just drew another box inside of it. This is actually going to be my toggle, by the way. Now I have my toggle. All I need to tell my toggle to do is say, hey, you're in this container here. I want you to actually be filled. I want just to fill it to the container it's in. And Shift A, auto layout, there's my toggle. My toggle fills the container. I'm going to turn my toggle into an auto layout as well. My toggle's going to fill the container. And I'm also going to add a color. I'll just leave it at white for the time being. This toggle fills and this section is fixed, and that's great. It is fixed, but it sticks to the container. What I can do inside of the toggle section is I can actually change the padding. Now, as you can see, if I change the padding of the section that the toggle is in, the toggle changes shape. And that's how we can actually control for it in a component. So if I was to add some rounding there, doesn't really matter too much. Let's say we keep it to 64. We don't need to do crazy numbers. And the toggle here has 4 padding, but if I wanted to make it a smaller toggle inside, I could then change the actual padding for it. If I wanted to make it bigger, I could just change the padding. That's some cool things that we can do in an auto layout. And because we also have this other spacer here, we can put them in together into a group, and this can be my switch section. And if you remember back here where, we'll zoom back out, remember back here, we had this layered section up the top here. We also had other sections that we could make, like the one with the text and one with the actual icons. So this is my top layer. And inside my top layer, I have those 2 elements. I can actually come over to the top layer. I can go to my auto layout, and then I can actually tell this to space between. And when I do so, and I expand this container, it will auto fill amount there, and it keeps the spacer to the other side, which is cool. So that's one way we could set up our element. There is one other way that I am going to be setting this up, is I'm actually going to tell my spacer to fill. And if I hide my spacer, actually, sorry, one thing, show my spacer, stick the switch layer here, and I'm going to make sure that this width is fixed by hide the spacer. That actual toggle flips to this side. The reason why is because there once was space between here. This the spacer pushed the actual switch all the way to the far end. But when it's gone, it jumps back to the other side because we set up our auto layout, and auto layout is actually left aligned. So hiding it will turn the switch on and off, which is awesome. Right back to. So I'm going to set it back to the size. I'm going to stick it inside of my switch container. So there it is. And I can stick it in the middle. I can grab my actual toggle, and there's a couple of cool things I'm going to set up. I'm going to set up some actual color IDs. Now, I already have existing colors. If you don't know how to make your existing colors, you just need to make a color. You need to press the little add button, and you can actually set it up that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the toggle. I'm going to pick one of my colors, I have a, let's say, a white 50. That would be my background color. I'm going to actually set up an outline, and it's always handy for this default asset to set up both. So you want to set up like a fill and then an outline, because what happens is if I select the whole asset, you can see that it says my dark white, and then I've got my darker white, but that's a 200. So you can see that it actually has two different colors. And because I've set up that as a pattern, I can simply change those by selecting the whole asset. So if I did the same for the background, let's say, but I instead picked up my top layer of my switch, which has the background, I'm going to turn around to my switch top layer, and I am going to pick the white, the whitest on that top layer, which is that one. And then I'm going to use the same outline color. So I'm going to actually set a stroke. I'll scroll down, and I believe I went to the 20, and now I have the same outline color. So if I went and I switched it to a blue, all the outlines are now blue, which is pretty cool. I'm going to go up to the top, make my rounding at 64, which, because it's 64 high, it will round the whole thing, make it look like it's round on both ends, which is pretty cool. Overall, we can go to our switch section. I can tell my switch section to not fill. The reason why it doesn't fill is because the top section is our normal frame. Let's turn that into an auto layout, because everything I pretty much use is an auto layout these days. And now that it's an auto layout, I'm going to make sure that it also will stack horizontally. This is not really for any particular reason, I just rather that inside my switch. And beyond that point, I'm going to remove the spacing. So I clear all those, don't need those variables at all. I'm going to make sure that the actual switch itself is fixed. So the outside of this whole switch will define the actual size and shape of this switch. We are going to be using what's called a reference from the outside, and it's going to dictate the shape and size from the inside of this actual asset. And simply if I expand it around, you can see that it does all those things. I can now start telling elements to fill, let's say, left and right, and hug top and bottom. Or I can set it to fill top and bottom, but it will do a funky thing when I pull it that way. So now I can do that, but I still need to make sure that the assets inside are doing what's intended. So that pushes, and now it works. There we go. And if I'm going to tell it to hug, nope. Let's just set that back up, my bad. All right, there we go. Now I can turn that also into an auto layout if I want. It doesn't really matter because it's just a spacer. It's not really doing too much. That's pretty much all it is to it. I am going to tell the outside to be 64 multiplied by 2. Now the switch is back to the original state. I haven't set this into a component, so that is what I'm doing next. We will create our component. Now we have this, and we have all of our color IDs set up, and we have the switch. We just need to go inside of our switch layer. We are going to set a visible parameter for the spacer, and we're just going to be calling this maybe just my switch on. I'll leave a question mark. There we go. So if I drag this up here, I can switch it on and off. And from here, all I need to do is layer my other components and build out a very similar thing. And I'm not going to get into that in this part of the video. If that's something that interests you, then please put a comment in the description box below. But from here, we now have our very simple but advanced kind of switch that we can use in our actual UI system. Let's get into the last part. All right, so we're going to turn this switch. We're going to start then putting it together into a layered component with some children instances. I'm going to duplicate the switch. I'm going to then create another component over the top. I will notice that this is the switch underneath. I'm going to rename it by just adding a little M. This will be my M switch. And then the name on the top is just what the switch is on the top. And I'll just say that it's going to be my red, let's say red box. So there's my red box switch. Obviously it's not a red box, so I'm going to select the switch. Down here, I have some colors I can change. I can switch down to a red. Now my red outline is there. I'm going to fill the background of the red, and that will be my 400. And then I'm going to, actually, I will switch that 400 to the light one, and then I'll take the puck toggle and set the toggle to that. And now I can select that switch underneath. I can set it to a different rounding. I can actually go to the toggle section. That will be, let's say, that little toggle section there. Grab the toggle, set this. Let's make that 4. Oh, we'll make it. And I can show you the power of, I'll go there, power pattern. Or let's say it's 2. There we go. So now we have our red switch. It doesn't, if I duplicate it, doesn't have the properties of the switch on and off, but I will add it. So I'll select this red switch, go to properties, come down to here, go to nested and set it on. Now it has the functionality. So if I was to change or add, let's say, a thing to this element, let's just for an example, I'm going to grab one of the layers underneath this here, which is my text section, and I am simply going to go to the master. I'm going to paste it in to the master right at the top. I will set it to absolute, and I am going to make sure that it fills the container, and it is going to sit under the switch. And as it does, it then propagates to the children, and the children then propagate to their children, and then you now have the additional actual element. This helps you build one asset and then deviate into different types of that one asset, and then those can update into the final asset. So once I've added in this additional element, which is the on and off text, I can then go up to the top of this, and now I have this additional element that I can work with inside of my switch. And now I have that element, I can switch it on and off, and I can see that I have these additional options now. And this is the power of layering your components and then building different variants of how the children relationship works. And I'll just zoom back out, and you can take a screenshot of this if you like, but basically build your master, layer all of your elements you need in that master, and then build another component, either the child component, which is just one of these, or you build a layered component and then you add in the additional content in this layer, or you then have those component pieces hidden and accessible in the master parent. And then you can build as many variations as you like until your heart's content. And that's how we build a very advanced layered component design system. Thank you, design thinkers, for watching this video. I hope that it has helped you understand a little more about how to create layered components, as well as leveraging your color IDs and building a little bit more intricate auto design layouts. Please let me know in the description box below. And if you're still enjoying this content, I would really appreciate it if you like, subscribe, and if you've all done all that, then I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks again.